Hey team, I wanted to record a short video on understanding the three I's in early years. That is the framework that Ofsted had set to understand how we can move through developing children and their development milestones, giving us a framework called the three I's. That starts with intent, implementation, and impact. So the simple guide is going to help us apply the three I's. So I'm going to speak to you a little bit about intent, which is what we want children to learn. That is what we want children to learn. Implementation, how we're going to do it. How are we going to teach it? How we're going to teach children. And the impact of how we know that it's working. How do we know that we've had a great enough impact on these children? It's a practical and clear guide to just it's designed for you for everyday work in the nursery. Let's talk a little bit about intent. So intent is, like I said, quite simply, what do we want children to learn? We know that children have starting points, so it's really important for you to try and assess children's starting points. You know this through their interests, through speaking to parents sometimes. There's lots of ways in which you can try and figure out what their starting points are. Then you set clear goals using your blooming terms for the learning objectives or for their learning and development. And then you focus on the all of the seven learning areas, or sometimes three prime areas if it's for children under two or for children who are emerging with unique needs. And then you plan and build around the children's interests and needs. So that is your intent, is to know, to set, to focus on, and then to plan. Knowing children's starting points, setting clear goals, in using the seven learning areas or the prime areas if they're under two or you have unique emergent needs, and then start your planning using your blooming terms. Implementation. How do we teach it? In the nursery, you have lots and lots of different ways in which you are teaching and focusing on teaching and learning. But a lot of the time, you're using play, you're using your routines, and most of all, you're using repetition, the things that you're doing on a daily basis to be able to ensure that those things that you're aiming for the children, to ensure that they are consistent and that they are embedding. You're role modeling language on a daily basis, so it's important to use full language and not using any slang language or any kind of, for example, using the word bot or dum. It's important that if we're encouraging clear communication, that we're using the full proper word to encourage the full content of what we're actually teaching children. Following children's interests and to obviously engage the children, but also to follow interests to kind of gauge what's next for them. And then obviously you use things such as a balance-led, child-led routine to initiate activities. So for example, if a child likes cars, you might, start in the sand, start making tracks for patterns, mark making, but also to engage children who don't like messy play. So again, it can work either way. So it's important that we use those things to actually think about how we're going to implement and how we're going to teach. How will we focus on teaching and learning? And then finally, the impact is really thinking about how do we know that it's working? Everything that we're putting in place, how do we know it's working? It's really, really simple, but sometimes I think that we make it a bit broader than it needs to be. Sometimes it becomes quite complicated than it needs to be. Really think about how do we know it's working? That's the impact. How do we measure that? How do we see if our next steps that we've planned for in our implementation is working? You do that by observing. You track progress regularly, making sure that you celebrate all of the meaningful wins for the children. So if they're able to, for example, put their coat away or zip up their jacket, or if they're able to sit in a circle time for 30 seconds, because that wasn't something that they were able to do, but you was able to help build that that learning over a period of time. Those are your wonderful small wins, because ultimately we're preparing them to leave us with a full backpack of great knowledge. It's really important that you make documents, meaning that you document things, and that's what your blooming terms are about. That's what your planning is about. Now, it's important that if you don't understand the blooming terms, that you speak to your site manager or your line manager or your room leader about maybe enhancing or understanding the simplicity of the blooming terms. And it's also important to be flexible in the response to children's needs. So let's not think of really elaborate things to do. Let's not think of really fancy things to do. Let's really keep it really, really simple, so that we can ensure that the impact in which we intend is always being met, and that it's simple to understand. The next steps. Your next steps are, I'd really like you to go away and just take a moment to read your blooming terms and thinking about the three I's in which that I've spoken about today, and think about whether they are actually aligned with the framework of the three I's. And then I'd really like you to use your children's targets every single day as part of your routine. This was something that somebody had spoken to me about today, and I was inspired in speaking to you about this today. But it's not something that you're not doing, it's just something that we need to keep up with our routine to embed on a daily basis. So, going back to the beginning in understanding about the intent. So it's, what do we want our children to learn? How we're going to make it happen? And then how do we assess? How do we know it's working? Those are the three I's. In your blooming terms, it's important that you're assessing constantly, because it's possible. Make simple steps, don't elaborate, don't make it overcomplicated. Thank you.